Hello class, let's talk about addition of integers. Well, the first thing I want us to talk about is what is an integer? So we need to kind of remember what is the definition of an integer. Okay? And integers are the set of whole numbers and their opposites. So if I were to give you the number 4 and ask you what is its opposite, you would say negative 4. Okay? Or if I gave you the negative 7 and say what is its opposite, you would say positive 7. Right? So what tells us about the opposites? Well, what tells us about the opposite is our good friend, Mr. Number Line. Okay, so if I were to have a number line here, and here's 0, and I were to put that same number 4 on a number line, what makes negative 4 its opposite? And it has to do with the distance the number is from 0. So if you'll notice right here, 1, 2, 3, 4, this number is 4 spaces to the right of 0. And negative 4 is 4 places to the left of 0. So what we say is that these two numbers have the same absolute value. Or in other words, the same distance away from 0, just in the opposite direction. And that's why we call them opposites. And that's what we're looking at when we're dealing with integers. So the first thing that we need to look at when we're dealing with integers is how are they written in the real world? What does it look like? What words represent positive or what words represent negative? So in this first example, it says use integers to represent each given situation. Okay, so this first one says 7 meters below sea level. Well, we know we have a 7 and we have a meters, but we've got this word that says below sea level. Below is a word that actually means negative. Okay, so below sea level, that means that this would be a negative 7 meters. A gain of 5 yards. Well, we know 5 yards is our number, so 5 yards. But then this gain is a word that represents positive or plus. So this would be positive 5 yards. And when we have a positive, we don't have to write a plus. It's okay if you do, but you don't have to have one. If there's not a sign, then we automatically assume the number is positive. That's why it's so important to put a negative when your number is negative. And then C, a loss of $3. So $3 is our amount, it's our dollar. Okay? But then loss is a word that represents negative. So this would be negative $3. And that's how we read and write integers. Now today what I'd like us to focus on though is adding and subtracting, or just adding integers. Okay, we're going to use a couple ways of looking at adding integers. Okay, the first way is we see just some problems here. And some of these problems are pretty simple, like 5 plus 3, negative 3 plus negative 4. Okay, those should be pretty simple. But then when we have multiple signs, one number's positive, one number's negative, that might give us a problem. So the first way we're going to look at this is with something called counters, two-color counters. Okay, so I'm going to look at this very first problem, the problem of 5 plus 3. Okay, and what that really means is, it says I've got 5 and I don't see a sign on it, so that means that this is a positive 5. So I'm going to pull out 5 positives out of this pile. And this one says I've got 3 positives. So I pull out 3 more positives here. Now, plus, way back when in elementary, meant put together. So that means basically I'm going to take these 3 right here and I'm going to put it together with the other 5. And so when I do that, I end up with how many total altogether? We end up with positive 8. Very good. Okay, now, if we did the same thing with negatives, so I've got this next question here, and it says I've got 3 negatives, and I'm going to add to that 4 negatives. So when I shove these together, what do I end up with? I end up with a negative 7. Okay? So first one, we ended up with a positive 8. The second one, we ended up with negative 7. But what happens if I have different signs? Like this third question here. Well, this one says I've got 5 negatives, so I'm going to pull out 5 negatives here. Okay, and then it says I've got 7 positives, so I pull out 7 positives. And we know that addition means to put them together, so I'm putting them together already. Okay. Now what we need to think about is what happens when I have this positive and a negative. Well, if I put a positive together with a negative, that's a plus 1 minus 1. That makes a big fat 0. Okay, so these two right here are just equivalent to the value of 0. And these are 0, and 0, and 0, and 0. So all those have a value of 0, so they can just go away. So what do we have for our final value? Our final thing is 2 positives, which actually give us positive 2. So what did I do with this 7 and this 5 to get a 2 out of it? Well, it kind of looks like I subtract them. And if you really pay close attention to what we did over here, I'm taking out all those zeros because they have no value. So I take these zeros here away, and I'm left with positive 2. So that's the same thing that happens here. These 5 negatives zap out 5 of these positives. Okay, so those turn to 0, and I'm left with just 2. Okay, and that gives us our answer. Okay, so what about this last one? What if I have several numbers like that? So I've got 4 negatives. I've got 6 positives. And then I've got 3 more negatives. Well, if addition means put together, could I take these 3 negatives right here and put them together with these 3 negatives over here? Or these negatives, not 3, but these 4 negatives. So here I now have how many negatives altogether? I now have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 negatives. And I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 positives. So again, what happens when I take a negative and a positive and put them together? They zap each other out and they become zeros. So we have all these zeros right here, and what do we have left? We have just a -1. And that's my answer for this particular problem. So what we're finding is that if my signs are alike, positive, positive, negative, negative, I add my numbers and keep the sign. If my signs are different though, I'm going to subtract my numbers and take the sign of the number that has more, the sign that's got, the greatest absolute value. And that's what our rules are. If our signs are alike, you're going to add your numbers together and keep the sign of the problem. So positive, positive, make more positive. Negative, negative, make more negative. But if my signs are different, you subtract your numbers and take the sign of the number with the greatest absolute value, or the number that's farthest from 0. So here I've got -4 and a positive 6. I subtract those 2 and I end up with 2 as my answer. Got a 5 and a -9. I subtract these 2 and I end up with a -4 because the 9 has more. So let's look at one other way of looking at these integer problems. Same problems, but this time let's look at them through a number line. Okay, through a number line we always start at the number 0. And this problem right here says I'm going to go 5. Now since it's a positive 5, we're going to go right 5. So I go right 5. Okay, and then it says I'm going to go right 3 more. Okay, so I go right 3 more. 1, 2, 3, and we can kind of imagine another number right here is 8, and we still get the same value of 8. Okay, now if we have a negative, well again we start at 0, and this says go -3. Well, that's left 3. So we go left 3, and then this says go left 4 more. 1, 2, 3, 4, and where did we end up at? We ended up at -7. Well, what if I have positive and negative? Well, I start at 0. And this one says go left 5. So I'm going to go left 5. But then this one says go right 7. So from the place that I'm at right now, I'm going to go right 7. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. And I'm back at 0. But then I've got to go 2 more. And where am I at? I end up at +2 as an answer. Well, what if I have 3 numbers? Same thing. We start at 0. This one says go left 4. So I go left 4. And then it says I'm going to go right 6. And then it says I'm going to go left 3. Where did I end up at? I ended up at -1, which is the answer. So again, let's just kind of review one more time. If your signs are alike, you add your numbers and keep the sign of the problem. If your signs are different, you subtract and take the sign of the number with the greatest absolute value. And that's adding integers. Until next time.